Let's look at Europe. Dramatic events are happening at Europe almost every hour at the moment, it would seem. Well, the scripture tells us that Russia will ally with or conquer Europe. We don't know how it's going to be achieved utterly, but they will be allied with Europe totally. More on that in a minute. Here's what we've just read that supports that. Gog, a title used of Russia. Of the land of Magog, that's Central Europe, predominantly Germany, is called the chief. The Hebrew word for chief is Rosh, from which we get Russia. With Gomer, France, and Tagama, Turkey, at the North Quarters, and all his bands and many people with him. So what we're going to see is Europe allied to Russia. Now, if you want to have more information on that later, ask somebody next door to you or come and have a chat to me later. Well, what are we going to look at tonight? We're looking particularly at the signs that have been happening. And so we're going to have a look at some of Russia's achievements this last year, 2021 through to now, in Belarus, in Kazakhstan, the manoeuvre called Zapad 2021, the military exercise. I believe it means Western. And every 4 years they do a defence tactics as if they're defending against NATO. And then Russia limits the European gas and oil supplies. And now Russia threatens to take Ukraine, and then it would seem Eastern Europe and probably all Europe, and we'll look at that in a minute. So what's going on? Well, we come back to mid last year, 2021. And there we can see Russia has got control somewhat of Belarus. There's the Prime Minister of Belarus and Putin. There was protest, but it all hushed up when they feared Russia and what Russia was doing, and consequently Belarus fundamentally has fallen under the influence of Russia. More on that in a minute, because Russia's been moving weaponry into that area of Belarus. So that happened mid last year. So the Belarus president warns the entire continent of Europe is on the verge of war. And that was stated by this chappie yesterday. Yesterday. It's on the verge of war because of what Russia has done, particularly somewhat moving into Belarus and on the borders of Russia facing Ukraine. Well then, Russia moved, January last year, moved into the area of Kazakhstan. Here it is. It's a huge area, very rich in oil, but the president or prime minister had troubles and said to Russia, well, we're allied with you, come and help me. And in they came. They sent quite a few troops in there. Here's pictures of them. There's the force arriving at the presidential request. And they shot some of the protesters, shot them dead in the streets. Calmed everything down, got everything back under control under that president and fundamentally under the control of Russia, and then went home. Russia reasserted its control brutally over Kazakhstan. What a message. What a message. Think of what Ukraine must be thinking. Well, in September last year, Russia did the largest military manoeuvre ever done in the last 40 years in the area of Europe. That was the exercise they do every 4 years on the border, but this time it was huge. They brought into that area 200,000 troops, along with 290 tanks and such like, into there. They built 20 bases, and those soldiers are there now. They haven't gone home. Okay, it's only September last year, but you can see they've moved in dramatically into the areas of Europe, now facing particularly the West. Okay? But Russia is now using another weapon. It would appear to be oil and natural gas. Huge quantities of gas come through Ukraine into Europe. Huge quantities come down, we'll talk about it in a second, through the Nordic 1 pipeline. Another lot through the pipeline through Poland and so forth. They're coming into Europe. And Europe needs it. Winter's about to come. Well, winter has come. If you went to the rivers today, you could walk right across them. They're frozen hard. It's freezing there in Europe. And they are dependent very muchly on that, the gas coming from Russia. And he's now using it as a weapon against Europe. Go against me and we'll cut your gas off. We'll cut your oil off. No cars on the road. No heaters in your house. No stoves. It's going to freeze. Well, things have been moving. You see, there are some of the pipelines going in from Russia, some through Belarus, some through Ukraine. That particular one, the Yamal pipeline there, was cut last year, opened up for a little while, and then cut again. Now no oil is coming through there into Poland. The Germans, in their kindness, are backflowing oil through the Yamal pipeline so that they can get a little bit of heat in their homes. But that's meaning less for Germany. Germany's in real trouble. They've built a second pipeline. Look. But it's not being used. It's like a gun to their head. You do what we want to, says Russia, or else we're not supplying the natural gas. And if we cut Ukraine off, through which masses of gas come, you're going to freeze. So the message is this. Russia can cut the gas pipelines to Europe through Poland and through Ukraine, and Europe is going to freeze. So you're living in Europe. What are you going to do? You're going to buy as much gas as you can if you can stockpile it, and they do that. Some of the places have got cylinders. Some of the homes have got cylinders. But the price has gone up a little. It's gone up. Well, I did a talk last year and I said it was 420%. Somebody came up and said, you're wrong. I said, oh, no, it's now 600%. Oh, I said, okay. I went home and looked at his site, and about a day or two later on, it had gone to 800%, but it's come back a bit since then. So they're saying some of the homes are having to pay up to $1,000 a month to keep heated. You think of it. And it could be totally cut off in a blink. Russia is really threatening Europe in many ways. Well, here's one of the headlines, one of the front pages of a paper. On the brink, Russia invasion of Ukraine. And they are putting troops in these areas here, all around, to threaten Russia. More on that in a minute. So, here we can see the next thing they're worrying about is that Russia might move into the areas here, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, right down to that area there, and get control of the Eastern European area again, and ultimately Europe. They're exceedingly worried by what's going on, exceedingly worried. Well, things are moving. But you know, it's quite funny really, it's an echo of the past. Long ago. You see, in the Bible it speaks of Russia as Rosh, not spelt that way in the King James, but R-O-S-H. Well, it was based initially in that place there, Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. And the man who was in charge of that in those days was this chap here. The man who looked after the Kievan Rus was Vladimir, not Vladimir Putin, but it's an echo. And he moved the capital later on to Moscow, or ultimately to Moscow. Echo of the past, so says the Encyclopedia Britannica. And we're seeing this being reversed in the other way. Putin want to control the Ukrainian area and coming back to total control of Rosh, the territory described in the scriptures. So what's been happening? Massive amounts of weaponry have been pouring across the country into Europe, into Russia. Look what's going on there. 12 military freight trains passed west in one day, past 7,000 kilometres across to Ukraine border to build up the weaponry. Staggering what's going on. Little wonder, there's the Prime Minister of Ukraine. He flew over to see Mr. Biden and he said, please help us. Oh, Mr. Biden says, oh, no, not really. No, we don't want to help you through NATO or Russia might invade. He got no real clear answers coming back. But things are looking scary. What about Germany? Germany is one of the top producers of arms in the world. I think it's number 3. And it's not allowing its weapons to go to Ukraine. Look, it's a joke. Ukraine begged them weapons. They said, oh, yeah, well, we'll send you some helmets. Well, they said, send us over 10,000. They sent 5,000 and a hospital, a portable hospital. Papers saw it as a joke. They weren't helping. And the idea that Germany delivers weapons that could then be used to kill Russians is very difficult to stomach for many Germans. They fear what might happen. They're afraid. More on that in a second. Here's The Economist. Only a few days ago, last week, The Economist wrote this article. As the world wonders if Vladimir Putin will invade Ukraine, the battle for the West is already underway. Without firing a shot, Putin has attacked the transatlantic alliance at its weakest link, Germany. All confidence in Germany has deteriorated by last month that Britain, for fear of overflying Germany with weapons for Ukraine, flew around them. Germany said to countries that have bought weapons from Germany, don't send them to Ukraine. That's illegal. So we know what's going to happen, don't we? The scripture says the power of Russia will be allied with the power of Magog, which, as I've said, is Central Europe, but dominantly Germany. And indeed, that seems to be happening before our eyes. As well as that, Russia has acted strongly. Dangerous moment. What have they done? They've sent ships into eastern Mediterranean and then into the Black Sea up here. Well, Turkey said you're not allowed to send certain types of ships in there, one of which was a submarine. So they sailed it through, there it is, and they raised the Turkish flag as they went through. Bluff. But the weapons are huge that's coming in there. Russia sent not 140,000 troops, but they sent 140,000 troops to sea, many of them in the eastern Mediterranean, but some of them into the Black Sea. Massive numbers of weaponry, staggering numbers. People in Sweden are seeing them passing day after day after day, going out into the world scene. Russian ships. And so what are we seeing happening? Europe's military threat will rise if Russia invades Ukraine. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they could be next. Now members of the NATO alliance and the European Union are worried that they could then be next. So maybe this is what's going to happen. Those top states, those states there, we'll look at them again in a second. Most of the people in those countries speak Russian. Sorry, I think it's about 38%, but in some of those countries, it's over 50%. And then we expect that to finally happen. More on that in a minute. So things are moving. The Baltic is ready for the worst as Russia flexes its muscles. And what are they thinking of doing? Moving into those countries there. And so, what's USA doing? Well, they're worried. They can see things are happening. So they've sent soldiers into Poland, down here, and into Germany and Romania. The Poles are calling up all sorts of people and bringing up their army as fast as they can. They're terrified. And now, Germany is gone up to have a chat to Putin. There's the leader, Schulz. The new leader, Mrs. Merkel's gone, and he's gone up to talk to Putin. And I believe what he is saying is probably right. Follow diplomacy first if you can. Who knows? Russia could invade, or alternatively, he could do what Hitler did in the earlier part of the Second World War. Hitler terrified Austria, Yugoslavia and so forth, marched their troops in and they didn't fire a shot. They just gave up. And Europe may well be in that situation, for all we know, in the near future. One way or another, they're going to control Europe because the scripture states so. And so things are looking fairly scary. Russia masses 175,000 troops on the border of Ukraine. I think they've got 30,000 in Belarus and another 40,000 in Donetsk, below that country. So they're really building up dramatically. Scary. The American soldiers claim Moscow has drawn up plans for a military offensive on several fronts to be the borders of Eastern Europe. So they're going to come in and sweep in, not only into Ukraine, but Poland and other countries. The Ukrainian crisis could spill into an invasion and war on European soil. That's what they're worried about. Are we surprised? I guess we aren't. We know Daniel chapter 2 spoke of an image, didn't it? The head, as we know, is the Russian power, allied with the area of Medo-Persia, Greece, more on that in a minute, and the Roman area, the European area, and particularly following what we're saying now, the area of Europe, the 10 toes, the area that got invaded in many years ago by the Huns, the Vandals, the Visigoths, the 10, and took control of Europe.